When a bullied 20-year-old black college student slipped her last $5 into a stranded biker's hand, she expected nothing in return. She didn't know the silent stranger wore a patch feared across the state, or that he had watched her classmates humiliate her only minutes earlier.
You
By
don't belong
sunrise,
here.
the college gates were trembling beneath the roar of 1,000 motorcycles, and every student who had mocked her was watching from the windows. The bikers hadn't come for revenge. They had come to repay a debt, but what they demanded from the school left the entire campus speechless. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. At 7:12 in the morning, the first motorcycle appeared on the road leading toward Crestview State College. Then came another, and another. Within seconds, the distant growl became a wall of thunder rolling across campus. Students stopped mid-conversation. Professors turned toward the windows. Trays were abandoned in the cafeteria as people rushed outside, phones raised. The road beyond the main gate was disappearing beneath an endless river of chrome, black leather, and headlights. At the front rode Wade Mercer. Behind him stretched a procession so long that no one could see where it ended. More than 1,000 motorcycles moved with precision, their engines shaking glass, rattling doors, and sending fear through offices in the administration building. Security guards hurried to close the gates. One called police. Another shouted for the riders to stop, but the convoy kept advancing until Wade raised one hand. The engines fell quiet one by one. That silence was more frightening than the noise. Across the courtyard, 20-year-old Talia Brooks stepped out of her residence hall. She had been awake most of the night, certain that her future at Crestview was slipping away. Then she saw the man at the front. She recognized him. He was the stranded biker she had helped the previous evening. But now he was not alone. Wade removed one glove and lifted a transparent sleeve. Inside it was a crumpled $5 bill, the final money Talia had carried in her wallet. College president Dr. Everett Sloan pushed through the security officers, his face tight with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Why are you here?" Wade looked past him toward the administration building. "A student at this college gave me 6 minutes with my dying daughter," he said. "We came to repay her and to collect the truth your school buried. Before we go back, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe no student should be punished for reporting racism, tap the like button." 24 hours earlier, Talia had no motorcycles behind her, no cameras protecting her, and almost no reason to believe anyone would listen. 20-year-old Talia Brooks had never imagined college could feel this fragile. She was a sophomore in the nursing program at Crestview State, the first person in her family to make it this far. Her mother, Denise, worked 12-hour shifts at a residential care facility, helping elderly patients eat, bathe, and make it through nights when their families could not be there. Denise had spent years telling Talia that education would open doors she had never been allowed to approach. Talia believed her. That was why she never told her mother how difficult things had become. Her scholarship covered tuition, but tuition was only the beginning. There were textbooks that changed every semester: lab supplies, transportation costs, medical fees, printing charges, uniforms, meal plans, and unexpected college expenses that seemed to appear whenever her account was nearly empty. Talia learned to calculate everything. She knew which meals in the cafeteria could be divided into 2 portions. She knew how many pages she could print before her student balance disappeared. She knew exactly how long she could wait before replacing a damaged notebook, a worn pair of shoes, or the strap on the backpack she had repaired with black tape 3 separate times. Most mornings, she was awake before the sun. She worked the opening shift at the campus cafe, tying on an apron while other students were still asleep. She poured coffee, wiped tables, carried boxes, and smiled at customers who rarely noticed the woman behind the counter was preparing for a full day of lectures. When her shift ended, she hurried across campus to class. Talia sat near the front, took notes, and asked questions only after she had rehearsed them silently. Nursing was not just a career to her. It was proof that every sacrifice her mother had made was leading somewhere. Between lectures, she often ate the cheapest thing she could find. Some days it was a cup of noodles. Other days it was crackers from the vending machine. On the hardest days, she told herself she was not hungry. At night, she studied in the library until the staff announced closing. Then she returned to the dorm room she shared with Kiara Bell, carrying her worn backpack and the determination she had begun the morning with. Before sleeping, Talia checked her bank account. The number was always lower than she hoped. That week, she had only a few dollars left until her next paycheck. Inside her wallet, folded behind her student identification, was a single $5 bill. Kiara had started noticing the skipped meals. "You didn't eat again," she said one evening. "I ate at work." "You had coffee at work." Talia forced a smile and looked away. "I only need to survive this semester," she said. "After that, everything gets easier." Later, she called her mother. Denise asked whether she was eating well, sleeping enough, and keeping up with her classes. Talia said yes to all three. Her voice remained bright until the call ended. Then the smile disappeared. She opened the desk drawer beneath her scholarship certificate and placed a thick folder inside. Across the front, written in block letters, were the words, "Incident Reports." She closed the drawer without opening it. The problem was that someone with more money, more influence, and far less to lose had already decided Talia did not belong there. Preston Vale had grown up in a world where doors opened before he reached them. His father, Graham Vale, was one of Crestview State's largest donors. The family name appeared on plaques, scholarship dinners, and the glass entrance of the university's newest athletics center. Professors knew Preston before he entered their classrooms. Administrators greeted him by name. He moved across campus with the easy confidence of someone who had rarely been told no. That confidence cracked when the hospital internship was announced. Preston had expected the position. He had spoken about it for weeks, as though the decision had already been made. But when the faculty committee released its choice, the offer went to Talia. Her grades were stronger. Her clinical evaluations were excellent. 3 professors had recommended her without hesitation. Preston did not congratulate her. At first, the remarks sounded casual. He asked whether she had entered Crestview through a diversity quota. He called her the scholarship project when his friends were nearby. He joked that the college had probably paid for her books, her room, and her meals, too. Then the comments became sharper. He mocked the way she wore her hair. He asked whether she could afford to attend events that required tickets. He suggested the internship had been taken from someone more qualified, so the hospital could improve its image. In private group chats, altered photographs of Talia began circulating beside racial jokes and captions about charity admissions. She learned about them only when someone sent her a screenshot and immediately begged her not to mention where it came from. Preston's friends excluded her from study groups, then complained that she was not collaborative. Invitations disappeared when she entered the room. Conversations stopped. Once, while she was reviewing notes in the library, one of them reached across the table and touched her hair without asking. Talia pulled away. Preston smiled as though she had ruined a joke. "You're making everything about race," he said. He was careful whenever a professor was nearby. His voice changed. The jokes became compliments. The insults became misunderstandings. If Talia reacted, he looked surprised, as though she had invented cruelty where none existed. For weeks, she tried to ignore it quietly. She knew how quickly a black woman could be described as aggressive, difficult, angry, ungrateful. She feared that defending herself too loudly would confirm the story Preston was already telling about her. Kiara refused to let the incidents disappear. "Write everything down," she told her, "even the things that seem small." So Talia began collecting proof. She saved screenshots and emails. She recorded dates and locations. She wrote down the names of witnesses. She photographed damaged belongings and described verbal incidents while the words were still fresh. During one afternoon lecture, a student saw Preston slide a racist image onto Talia's desk. The student paused. Their eyes met Talia's for a moment. They looked as though they might speak. Then the professor entered. The student lowered their eyes, gathered their books, and moved to another seat. That silence stayed with Talia longer than the image itself. By then, she had submitted 3 formal complaints. Each one had returned with the same conclusion: insufficient evidence. Preston's confidence did not come only from his father's money. It came from knowing the college had already chosen which student it was willing to lose. Talia arrived at Assistant Dean Lenora Whitcomb's office 10 minutes early, carrying the folder she had built over weeks of careful silence. It was heavier now. Inside were screenshots, dates, names, copies of emails, photographs, and handwritten descriptions of moments she had once tried to dismiss. She had organized everything by date, marked each incident, and attached the responses from the college. 3 complaints, 3 closures, 3 identical findings. Insufficient evidence. Whitcomb invited her in with a practiced smile and pointed toward the chair across from her desk. Talia, I understand you've been having some difficulties. The word difficulties made the harassment sound small, almost ordinary. Talia placed the folder on the desk and opened it. She explained that the comments were becoming more direct, that Preston's friends had begun circulating altered photographs, and that she was being excluded from academic groups she needed for her coursework. She described the incident in the library. She named the students who had witnessed it. She showed Whitcomb the messages. For several moments, the assistant dean appeared to listen. Then she closed the folder. College students sometimes make immature jokes, she said. Talia waited. Whitcomb continued carefully. Preston had no formal disciplinary history. Intent was difficult to prove. Humor could be misunderstood, especially when conversations were removed from their original context. Talia pointed toward the screenshots. Whitcomb barely looked at them. A public accusation could damage several young lives, she said. The words settled between them. Talia asked whose lives she was worried about. Whitcomb did not answer. Instead, she suggested mediation. A private conversation, she said, might allow both sides to express their concerns without creating unnecessary conflict. She reminded Talia that campus relationships could affect future recommendations and professional opportunities. Then her voice became softer. Scholarship students are expected to maintain good community standing. Talia stared at her. She asked why her previous complaints had been closed when she had provided dates, witnesses, and written evidence. Whitcomb folded her hands. Learning to manage uncomfortable personalities is part of becoming an adult. For a moment, Talia said nothing. The folder remained on the desk, but it no longer felt like evidence. It felt like something the college had already decided not to see. "Are you threatening my scholarship?" she asked. Whitcomb leaned back. "No one is threatening anything. I'm simply encouraging you to think carefully about how continued conflict may affect your experience here." It was not an answer, and both of them knew it. Talia gathered her documents 1 page at a time. Whitcomb did not help. She only watched as the screenshots, photographs, and unanswered complaints disappeared back into the folder. If you believe money should never buy protection for a bully, comment, "No one is above accountability." Talia reached the doorway just as Whitcomb's phone began to ring. She would have kept walking, but the name on the assistant dean's lips stopped her. "Mr. Vale," Whitcomb said. "I was just speaking with her." Talia did not hear what came next. She did not need to. Her complaint was supposed to be confidential, yet Preston's father already knew she had been inside that office. For the first time, the fear she had tried to suppress felt entirely justified. Talia entered the office asking for protection. She left, wondering whether reporting the truth had placed her education in even greater danger. The student volunteer fair was supposed to be one of the safest places on campus. By early afternoon, tables had been arranged outside the campus center, each one covered with posters, sign-up sheets, and displays promoting local charities. Students moved between booths while music played through portable speakers. and faculty members greeted visiting community organizations. Talia had spent most of the previous week preparing a display for a community health project focused on improving access to basic medical screenings in underserved neighborhoods. She had designed the posters herself, printed educational materials using the last of her campus credit, and borrowed several demonstration supplies from the nursing department. The project mattered to her. It reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. She wanted to work with people who were too often ignored until their problems became emergencies. For a few hours that afternoon, she tried to place everything else outside her mind. She arranged the final stack of brochures and adjusted a handwritten sign at the front of the table. That was when she heard Preston's voice behind her. "So this is where the scholarship money goes." Talia did not turn immediately. Preston approached with 3 friends, moving through the crowd as though they had arrived for a performance. Dozens of students were nearby. Some recognized the tension and began watching before anything had happened. Preston looked over Talia's display. He asked whether the college had paid for all of it. One of his friends commented on her clothes, wondering aloud whether she had worn the same blouse earlier that week. Another asked whether students on full scholarships received extra money for food. Talia kept arranging her materials. She told them she was working and asked them to leave. Preston smiled. He said she had become very confident since receiving the hospital internship. He wondered whether she truly believed she had earned it. Perhaps, he suggested, the hospital wanted someone who looked good in a diversity photograph. His friends laughed. Talia looked around for a faculty advisor, but the closest staff members were helping at booths farther across the courtyard. A student nearby lifted a phone and began recording. Preston noticed and appeared pleased. He reached inside his backpack and removed a sheet of heavy paper decorated with a gold border. At the top was the Crestview State emblem. Beneath it, in large letters, were the words, "Crestview's favorite charity case." He held it up for everyone to see. Several students laughed immediately. Others looked uncomfortable, but remained where they were. More phones appeared. Preston began reading the fake certificate aloud. It congratulated Talia for receiving free tuition, free opportunities, and special treatment, while more deserving students were forced to compete fairly. Talia felt heat rising through her face. She reached for the certificate, intending to tear it from his hands. Preston stepped back. His other hand was holding a large iced drink. As Talia reached again, he moved suddenly and knocked the cup across her chest. Cold liquid spread down her blouse. The rest poured over the table, soaking the brochures, staining the posters, and running across the notes she had spent hours preparing. For one stunned second, nobody spoke. Then someone laughed. A few more joined in. The student recording moved closer. Talia looked down as liquid dripped from the edge of the table and gathered on the pavement. One of her posters folded inward as the paper absorbed the drink. Loose pages lifted in the breeze and scattered across the courtyard. She could hear the phones recording. She could hear the wet paper shifting in the wind. She could hear distant traffic beyond the campus entrance. Most of all, she could hear her own breathing. Preston stepped close enough that only she could clearly hear him. "People like you should learn when they're being tolerated." Talia stared at him. The cruelty in his voice was no longer disguised as humor. There was no misunderstanding, no missing context, and no innocent explanation. He wanted her to know exactly what he believed. She looked toward the crowd. Some students avoided her eyes. Others continued filming. A few seemed disturbed, but none moved between them. Talia gathered her bag and tried to leave. One of Preston's friends stepped into her path. She moved to the left. He moved with her. When she tried the other direction, he blocked her again. "Move," she said. He smiled. Talia pushed past him with her shoulder, using only enough force to escape the circle. She did not hit him. She did not threaten him. She simply forced her way through the space they had refused to give her. And Preston immediately raised his voice. She assaulted him. The accusation traveled across the courtyard faster than the truth. By the time campus security arrived, the certificate had been lowered, Preston's drink was gone, and his friends were describing Talia as unstable. The security officers did not begin by asking why her clothes were soaked or why her project had been destroyed. They asked whether she had pushed another student. Talia tried to explain. She pointed toward the phones and asked them to review the recordings. Preston interrupted repeatedly, claiming she had become aggressive after being questioned about the internship. One officer requested Talia's student identification. She hesitated before handing it over. He told her the card would be temporarily retained while the incident was reviewed. Until then, she could face restrictions on certain campus facilities. Talia asked whether Preston's identification would also be confiscated. No one answered. The officer then warned her that allegations of physical aggression could affect her hospital internship. Because she was a scholarship student, he added, the matter might also be referred for a broader conduct review. Her project lay ruined behind them. The students who had laughed were beginning to leave. Those who had recorded the humiliation saved their videos and walked away without offering their names as witnesses. Preston remained with his friends, smiling as though the afternoon had unfolded exactly as planned. Across the street, beside a motorcycle that would not start, a broad-shouldered man in a weathered leather vest had seen the final part of the confrontation. His name was Wade Mercer. From where he stood, he had watched Talia attempt to leave. He had seen the student block her path. He had seen security arrive only after Preston began shouting. As Talia walked away carrying her stained bag, Wade looked past her toward Preston. Preston was still laughing. Wade's expression hardened. Only part of the patch across his back was visible beneath the afternoon light, but it was enough to suggest that he did not ride alone. Talia believed everyone who had witnessed her humiliation had chosen silence. One stranger had not, but he was facing a crisis of his own. Wade was still watching Talia disappear beyond the edge of campus when his phone began vibrating inside his vest. The screen showed the hospital. For hours he had been expecting a call, but not this one. His daughter Nadine had been fighting leukemia for 2 years. There had been good weeks, terrible weeks, and moments when the doctors allowed the family to believe the treatment might be working. That morning, her condition had worsened, but Wade had been told she was stable enough for him to step away briefly. The nurse's voice destroyed that hope. "Mr. Mercer, you need to come now. She's asking for you." Wade looked toward the road, then at his motorcycle. "I'm on my way." He ended the call and swung one leg over the seat. The engine turned once, coughed, and died. He tried again. Nothing. Wade checked the tank and felt his stomach tighten. He had been riding on reserve fuel, and a leak in the fuel line had drained more gasoline than he realized. The hospital was miles away. His phone vibrated again. He did not answer. He pushed the motorcycle toward a service station nearby, moving as quickly as the weight of the machine allowed. By the time he reached the pumps, his hands were beginning to shake. Inside, a handwritten notice hung beside the register. Card system down. Cash only. Wade searched every pocket before remembering that his wallet was still at home. He had left so quickly after the hospital update that he had taken only his phone and keys. He removed his watch and placed it on the counter. "Let me leave this. I only need enough fuel to reach the hospital." The clerk shook his head. Wade offered his identification instead. The clerk refused again. The hospital called a third time. That was when Talia entered. Her blouse was still stained. Her bag hung from one shoulder. She moved with the exhausted silence of someone trying not to fall apart in public. She studied the cheapest food she could find, a packet of crackers, a cup of noodles, a piece of fruit. Then she heard Wade speaking. "My daughter is waiting for me. I'm not asking you to fill the tank. Just enough to get there." Talia glanced toward his phone as another hospital notification appeared. She noticed his trembling hands and the panic he was trying to hide. Wade never looked at her. He never asked her for anything. Talia opened her wallet. Behind her student identification was one crumpled $5 bill. It was everything she had left until payday. For a moment she stared at it. Then she crossed the store and pressed it into Wade's palm. He looked down at the money, then at her stained clothes. "Are you sure you can spare this?" No, Talia said, but whoever is waiting for you shouldn't have to keep waiting. Wade stood motionless, as though he wanted to remember her face. Then he nodded. At the pump, he bought exactly $5 of fuel. Talia left the station without food. Before Wade started the motorcycle, he called after her. "What's your name?" She turned. "Talia." His eyes moved toward the college. "What happened back there?" Talia tightened her grip on her bag. "Nothing anyone there cares about." Wade watched her walk away, then raced toward the hospital. Wade opened the throttle the moment the motorcycle cleared the service station. The engine surged beneath him, but every second felt too slow. His phone vibrated inside his vest. Once, then again. The hospital was calling, and each unanswered ring carried the same terrible possibility. Nadine might be gone before he reached her. Wade moved between lanes, watching every light, every turning car, every shrinking mile. The fuel gauge hovered, just above empty. $5 had bought him movement, but not certainty. At the hospital, a clock above the nurses' station continued its steady advance. The clock moved above them without mercy. Nadine's breathing had become shallow and uneven. A nurse looked toward the corridor. Nadine's eyes opened briefly. "Is he here?" she whispered. "Not yet," the nurse said. "But he's coming." On the road, Wade gripped the handlebars until his knuckles ached. The receipt from the gas station was still folded in his pocket. $5. A number so small it should not have carried the weight of a final goodbye. His phone rang again. He pushed harder. When the hospital came into view, the motorcycle was nearly out of fuel. Wade turned into the parking lot, left the engine running, and sprinted toward the entrance. A nurse was waiting. "Mr. Mercer?" He did not stop to answer. She led him through the corridor, past closed doors and silent families, toward the room at the end of the hall. Wade entered with 6 minutes left. Nadine lay beneath a white blanket, smaller than he remembered. She was 30 years old, though illness had made time difficult to measure. She had grown up around the motorcycle club, learning members' names before she could pronounce them properly. As an adult, she organized toy drives, hospital fundraisers, meal deliveries, and the annual cancer support ride scheduled for the following morning. Wade crossed the room and took her hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I almost didn't make it." Nadine opened her eyes. "You made it." Her voice was barely more than breath. He bowed his head over her hand and tried to steady himself. Nadine looked toward his vest. "How?" Wade removed the crumpled $5 bill. "A girl helped me." He told her what he had seen. A young college student walking away with stained clothes. Tears she was trying to hide. A ruined project in her arms. Students laughing behind her. A girl who looked as though the world had already taken too much. She had almost nothing, Wade said. That was the last money in her wallet. Nadine looked at the bill. "And she gave it to you?" Wade nodded. "Then she's the kind of person the world should protect," Wade told her. The college did not appear interested in protecting Talia. He described what he witnessed outside the campus and how security treated her. Nadine's fingers tightened faintly around his. "Tomorrow's ride," she whispered. "Don't cancel it." Wade shook his head. "The riders will understand. We can postpone it." "No." She gathered what little strength remained. "Take them to her. Promise me she won't stand alone." Wade looked at his daughter, understanding this was not a suggestion. "I promise." Nadine's breathing slowed. Wade stayed beside her, holding her hand and telling her he loved her. When her final breath came, her father was there to hear it. For several seconds, the room held only silence. Talia's $5 had not simply purchased gasoline. They had spared Wade from arriving at an empty bed and living forever with the knowledge that he had been too late. Later, he placed the bill inside a transparent protective sleeve. At the same moment Wade was saying goodbye to his daughter, Talia was receiving an email that could destroy everything she had worked for. Talia returned to the dorm long after the volunteer fair had ended, completely alone. She had not eaten. The $5 that might have bought dinner were gone, and the humiliation outside the campus center clung to her more heavily than the stains on her blouse. The damaged project materials were bent beneath her arm. The main poster was warped beyond repair. Kiara looked up from her desk and froze. What happened? Talia placed the ruined display on the floor without answering. Kiara saw the stain across her clothes. Was it Preston? Talia nodded. Kiara reached for her phone. I saw part of it from the upper floor. She opened a video recorded through the residence hall window. Preston stood beside Talia's table with his friends around him. He raised the fake certificate. The words Crestview's favorite charity case appeared when the paper turned toward the camera. The recording captured the drink spilling across Talia and the display as students laughed. It showed Talia gathering her bag and trying to leave. It also showed one of Preston's friends moving into her path before she pushed past him. What he did is right there, Kiara said. We need to post this. Talia shook her head. The video did not contain Preston's quietest statement. His voice was lost beneath the courtyard noise, and the camera was too far away to record the words he had spoken directly into her face. People like you should learn when they're being tolerated. Without those words, Preston could call the incident a joke. He could say the drink spilled accidentally. His friends could claim she misunderstood everything. The administration already warned me about escalating this, she said. If we post it, they'll say I'm trying to damage the college. Before Kiara could answer, a notification sounded from Talia's laptop. The subject line appeared first. Temporary suspension from academic placement pending disciplinary review. The college accused Talia of aggressive physical behavior. Until the investigation was complete, she was suspended from the hospital internship she had earned. A second notice arrived moments later. It warned that any confirmed conduct violation could trigger a review of her scholarship eligibility. Talia read both messages twice. Then she understood. Preston had reported her first. He had humiliated her, blocked her from leaving, and turned her attempt to escape into evidence against her. Talia closed the laptop and pulled a travel bag from beneath her bed. Kiara watched as she folded clothes with trembling hands. What are you doing? If I leave now, maybe I can transfer before they expel me. You didn't do anything wrong. That hasn't mattered yet. Kiara returned to the email and studied the recipients. Beneath the campus addresses was an external contact linked to the Vale Family Foundation. Preston's father had been copied on Talia's disciplinary notice. The same college that questioned her evidence had shared information about her case with the family of the student she accused. Talia sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by half-packed clothes and the remains of the project she had once been proud of. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe hard work might not be enough to save her place at Crestview. Talia believed the night had taken away her future. Across town, a dying woman's final promise was beginning to move through a family of riders. Several members of Wade's motorcycle club were already waiting outside Nadine's room when the doctor quietly confirmed that she was gone. Some had arrived in riding clothes. Others had come directly from work. A few had been sitting in the same hospital corridor for hours, unwilling to leave while the woman they considered family was fighting for one more breath. Nadine had grown up among them. As a child, she attended club gatherings holding Wade's hand, learning the riders' road names before she understood what the patches on their vests represented. She celebrated birthdays in crowded clubhouses and spent weekends surrounded by motorcycles, loud laughter, and people who treated loyalty as something proven through action. As she grew older, Nadine became one of the club's most dependable organizers. She arranged toy drives for children spending the holidays in hospitals. When a rider's wife became seriously ill, Nadine created a meal schedule and made certain the family never returned to an empty refrigerator. She collected donations for treatment expenses, transportation costs, and hotel rooms near specialist clinics. After her leukemia diagnosis, she refused to let the disease turn her attention entirely inward. She created an annual cancer support motorcycle ride to raise money for families who could not afford the hidden costs of treatment. The event grew every year. Riders came from neighboring towns, then neighboring counties, until affiliated chapters across the state began participating. Nadine called them her extended family. The ride scheduled for the following morning was expected to be the largest yet. More than 1,000 riders had already registered. Routes had been approved, volunteers assigned, and gathering points organized. Everyone assumed it would now be canceled. Then Wade entered the waiting area. His face carried the stillness of someone whose grief had not yet found a way out. In one hand, he held the crumpled $5 bill Talia had given him. The riders stood as he approached, but Wade did not speak immediately. He placed the bill on a small table between them. "A student who couldn't afford dinner gave me the money that brought me here," he said. "Because of her, I held my daughter's hand when she left this world." No one moved. Wade explained what he had witnessed near Crestview. He told them about Talia's stained clothes, the students laughing, and the security officers who appeared more interested in controlling her than protecting her. Then he shared Nadine's final request. "She told us not to cancel the ride. She told us to take it to the girl." The waiting area fell completely silent. One rider reached into his wallet, removed $5, and placed it beside Talia's bill. Another did the same, then another. Within moments, the table was covered with $5 bills. Some riders added 20s, 50s, and hundreds, but each contribution began with the same amount Talia had surrendered. Grief was becoming purpose, yet no one spoke about revenge. Wade made that clear before the first call was placed. They would not ride to Crestview to threaten Preston. They would not frighten students or turn Nadine's final request into violence. First, they would learn exactly what had happened. They would find witnesses, records, and every piece of evidence the college had ignored. What began as a promise to one dying woman soon uncovered a pattern the college had spent years hiding. The first calls began before Wade had left the hospital. The motorcycle club was larger than the people who wore its patches. Around every rider stood families, friends, former colleagues, and neighbors whose skills had been built far from the road. There were attorneys who understood civil rights law and student disciplinary procedures, teachers who knew how institutions buried complaints beneath careful language, veterans who recognized the difference between confusion and coordinated silence, local business owners who knew the Vale family's influence across the county. There were journalists, parents of current students, former Crestview employees, and graduates who had left the college carrying stories they had never told publicly. Wade asked for facts, no rumors, no threats, no conclusions they could not prove. The first former student responded within 20 minutes. She described racist messages taped to her dormitory door and a complaint that disappeared after she was encouraged to accept private mediation. Another former student reported that his property had been destroyed after he challenged a well-connected classmate. When he complained, an administrator warned him that continued conflict could affect his scholarship recommendation. Both cases had been closed with the same phrase Talia had seen 3 times. Insufficient evidence. More accounts followed. A parent forwarded emails showing her daughter had been discouraged from discussing harassment publicly. A former nursing student described retaliation after reporting discriminatory comments during a clinical assignment. Another graduate said administrators pressured her to withdraw a complaint because the accused student's family funded a campus program. 2 students had left Crestview entirely. One transferred after losing access to an academic opportunity. The other abandoned college when the administration began treating her complaints as a conduct problem. The riders began recognizing the pattern. Old emails opened across computer screens. Screenshots arrived from former students who had saved them for years. Printers ran continuously as complaint records, policy documents, and correspondence filled tables. Attorneys highlighted sections of Crestview's own rules requiring impartial investigations and protection from retaliation. Journalists searched archived reports. Parents contacted their children. Riders called former students whose names appeared in past campus discussions. Photographs of donor plaques circulated beside records of disciplinary decisions. Again and again, complaints involving influential families ended quietly. Again and again, the students who reported them were warned about scholarships, reputations, or professional opportunities. A former employee finally agreed to speak. She had worked under Assistant Dean Lenora Whitcomb and claimed staff members were instructed to resolve sensitive complaints without public findings whenever major donors were involved. According to her, the goal was not always to determine what happened. Sometimes, the goal was to prevent the complaint from becoming visible. That changed the meaning of everything. The college may not have simply failed to protect Talia. Administrators may have participated in a system designed to isolate students until they withdrew, transferred, or stopped speaking. As the evidence accumulated, so did the donations. $5 bills covered tables at the clubhouse. Digital contributions arrived from affiliated chapters, cancer support families, former students, and strangers who had heard about Nadine's final request. Then one rider received an internal email forwarded by a former Crestview employee. The message was recent. Its subject line contained Talia's last name, Brooks Scholarship Containment Strategy. Wade read the title twice, but did not open it for the room immediately. The words alone suggested the college had discussed Talia's scholarship not as something to protect, but as leverage to control her. By 2 a.m., the riders were no longer planning only to thank Talia. They were preparing to confront an institution. Before dawn, Wade gathered the chapter leaders inside the clubhouse and told them Nadine's ride would go forward. The route, however, had changed. They would not travel to the cancer center as planned. They would ride to Crestview State College. Wade told them the journey would honor three things: Nadine's life, Talia's kindness, and every student who had been silenced because an institution valued influence more than truth. Then he established the rules. There would be no threats. No weapons would be displayed. No student would be harassed or confronted. Every rider would follow traffic laws, remain peaceful, and obey the designated marshals. Most importantly, Talia would decide whether she wanted to speak. The riders were not going to take control of her story. "Bring evidence," Wade said, "not aggression." The clubhouse answered with silence and nods. Each rider was asked to contribute at least $5 to a new fund named in Nadine's honor, the Nadine Mercer $5 Promise Fund. Its purpose was simple. It would help students facing discrimination, retaliation, food insecurity, and emergency educational expenses. Many riders gave far more than $5, but every donation carried the meaning of the bill Talia had surrendered when she could not afford to lose it. The truth about the ride spread through affiliated chapters. The feared motorcycle club was not preparing to attack Preston Vale. It was heading toward Crestview with attorneys, former student witnesses, copies of suppressed complaints, a scholarship fund, a peaceful assembly permit, media attention, and the final request of a dying woman. While riders checked tires and fueled motorcycles, Talia continued packing her belongings. While black memorial ribbons were tied to handlebars, Kiara replayed the video from the courtyard, searching for anything the college could not dismiss. Wade placed Talia's $5 bill inside his vest. Across the highway, the first light of morning began to rise. In the dorm room, Talia lay awake beside her half-packed bag, staring into the darkness and wondering how she would tell her mother she might be coming home. If you believe kindness is strength, not weakness, subscribe now. What happens next proves that standing beside someone can change far more than one life. Then, all across the county, hundreds of engines started almost at once. At 6:40 that morning, Kiara rose from her bed and opened the curtains. For several seconds, she heard nothing. Then a low rumble reached the campus from somewhere beyond the hills. It grew louder, and with every passing second, it was coming closer still. By the time the first motorcycles reached Crestview State College, The sound had already traveled through every building on campus. More than 1,000 riders moved along the main road in a dark, disciplined procession. Black memorial ribbons were tied to handlebars, mirrors, and leather vests, each one honoring Nadine Mercer and the promise she had made Wade keep. Students crowded against classroom windows. Professors stopped speaking in the middle of lectures. Cafeteria tables emptied as people hurried outside with their phones raised. Within minutes, videos of the approaching convoy were spreading far beyond Crestview. Campus security locked the main gate before the first motorcycle reached it. Local police arrived expecting disorder, but the situation they found was nothing like the emergency the college had described. The riders carried a valid assembly permit. Attorneys stood among them with folders of documents. Designated speakers had been selected. Written requests for a formal meeting had already been delivered to the administration. Every participating chapter had received the same nonviolence rules. No threats, no harassment, no confrontation. The officers could hear the engines, but they could find no law being broken. Wade led the procession to the gate and raised one hand. The motorcycles stopped. One by one, the engines went silent. Talia stepped outside with Kiara beside her. When she saw Wade at the front, recognition struck first. Fear followed immediately. The man she had helped at the service station had returned with more riders than she could count. Talia imagined the disciplinary email waiting on her laptop. She imagined the administration accusing her of organizing the gathering. Whatever remained of her scholarship could disappear before the morning ended. Dr. Everett Sloan emerged from the administration building surrounded by security officers. "This assembly is disrupting college operations," he announced. "You need to disperse immediately." Wade removed a transparent sleeve from inside his vest. The crumpled $5 bill rested inside it. "This student gave me the last money in her pocket," he said. "It bought enough fuel for me to reach my daughter 6 minutes before she died." The crowd became completely silent. Even the students recording from the windows stopped speaking. Wade looked toward Talia. "My daughter's final request was that Talia never stand alone again." Talia stared at the bill she had expected never to see again. Until that moment, she had believed she had merely helped a stranger reach the hospital. Now she understood that her $5 had carried a father into the final moments of his daughter's life. Wade turned toward the administration building. "We're not here for the student who bullied her," he said. "We're here for the people who taught him there would never be consequences." Dr. Sloan attempted to interrupt, but Wade raised the folder held by the attorney beside him. He told the president that the writers possessed former student testimony, copies of dismissed complaints, and internal college communications regarding Talia's scholarship. For the first time that morning, Sloan's expression changed. The college had prepared for angry bikers. It had not prepared for grieving parents, former students, attorneys, witnesses, and its own confidential records. Before the meeting began, Wade asked to speak with Talia away from the gates, the cameras, and the watching crowd. For the first time that morning, the noise seemed to disappear. He removed the transparent sleeve from inside his vest and held it between them. The crumpled $5 bill looked exactly as it had when Talia pressed it into his palm at the service station. "You thought you gave me $5 for fuel," Wade said. "You gave me 6 minutes with my daughter." Talia looked at him without speaking. Wade told her what happened after she left. He described racing toward the hospital while the calls kept coming, reaching the parking lot with almost no fuel remaining, and running through the corridors because he believed he might already be too late. He told her about entering Nadine's room. He had taken his daughter's hand, apologized for nearly missing her final moments, and told her he loved her. Nadine had heard him. She had known her father came. Then Wade explained the promise she asked him to make. Her final request was that the student who had helped him would not be left to face the college alone. Talia's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," she said. "I only helped someone who needed it." Wade shook his head. "You gave away what you couldn't afford to lose. That is what made it extraordinary." He showed her the contributions collected through the Nadine Mercer $5 Promise Fund. The amount had already grown large enough to protect Talia's education if Crestview attempted to take her scholarship. There was also enough to begin helping other students facing discrimination, retaliation, hunger, and emergency expenses. But Wade did not tell her what to do next. She could accept the support, leave Crestview, and begin again somewhere else. No one would blame her. Or she could enter the administration building, place her evidence before the college, and challenge the system that had tried to silence her. The decision had to be hers. For months, Talia had believed silence was the price of survival. Now she understood that speaking might protect someone who came after her. "I gave you $5 because someone was waiting for you," she said. "I didn't give it to start a war." Wade placed the protected bill in her hand. "Then don't start a war," he said. "Start the truth." Talia closed her fingers around the bill, turned toward the administration building, and began walking. The public meeting was moved into Crestview's largest campus hall because no ordinary conference room could hold everyone who demanded to be present. Talia entered with Kiara beside her, and Wade a few steps behind. Club representatives filled several rows, joined by attorneys, former students, faculty members, administrators, student reporters, and local media crews. Preston sat near the front with his father, Graham Vale, whose name appeared on buildings across the campus. For the first time, Talia was not being asked to explain herself inside a closed office. The entire college was listening. Dr. Everett Sloan opened the meeting with the calm language of someone trying to reduce a crisis before it became permanent. He described the confrontation outside the campus center as a misunderstanding between students. He said emotions had risen on both sides, that incomplete recordings could be misleading, and that Crestview remained committed to fairness. No one interrupted him. When he finished, the attorney representing the writers stood and placed the first folder on the table. It contained Talia's 3 formal complaints. Each one included dates, screenshots, witness names, and written descriptions of the harassment. Each one had been closed with the same conclusion: insufficient evidence. Then came complaints from former students. The names were different, but the pattern was nearly identical: racial harassment, destroyed property, threats tied to scholarships, pressure to accept private mediation, warnings not to discuss cases publicly. Several of the accused students came from families with significant financial relationships to Crestview. Emails showed administrators discussing donor concerns before determining whether the complaints were credible. Internal records revealed that cases involving wealthy families were repeatedly diverted away from formal disciplinary procedures. Statements from former employees described instructions to resolve sensitive complaints quietly. Then the attorney produced documentation showing that Talia's scholarship had been discussed before any disciplinary investigation into the confrontation had begun. The college had not waited to establish what happened. It had begun considering how much pressure she could withstand. Another document proved that confidential information about Talia's complaint had been shared with Graham Vale. Preston's father had known about private meetings, disciplinary discussions, and scholarship concerns before Talia had received official notice herself. Murmurs moved through the hall. Then the attorney displayed one final email. No music softened the moment. No one spoke over it. The subject line was read slowly: Brooks Scholarship Containment Strategy. The message showed senior administrators discussing whether a scholarship review could convince Talia to end her complaint. Her allegations were described not as a student safety concern, but as a threat to donor confidence. Talia sat completely still. For months, she had wondered whether she was imagining the pattern. Now the college's own words confirmed it. The administration had not merely failed to protect her, it had considered using her education to silence her. Dr. Sloan's attorney finally stood and argued that none of the documents proved Preston's intent during the public confrontation. Kiara's recording, he said, was incomplete. It showed embarrassment and confusion, but it did not clearly capture the statement Talia claimed Preston had made. Without that missing evidence, he insisted, the incident could still be interpreted as an immature joke that escalated. Preston leaned back slightly, confidence returning to his face as the administration offered him one final shield. Before anyone could respond, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Every face in the hall turned toward the open doors. Mallory Keene stood there alone. For months, she had been part of Preston's circle. She had laughed when the others laughed, remained silent when the jokes became cruel, and helped protect the version of events Preston wanted everyone to believe. Now she looked frightened. But she kept walking. Preston rose halfway from his seat. Mallory, don't. She did not look at him. Mallory approached the front of the hall and handed her phone to the club's attorney. Then she faced Talia. Preston started targeting you because you got the internship he thought belonged to him, she said. The room became still. Mallory admitted the fake certificate had been created the night before the volunteer fair. The group had planned where to approach Talia and who would begin recording. They expected her to become angry. They wanted a reaction that could be shown without the harassment that caused it. Preston had assured them there would be no serious consequences. According to Mallory, he said his father would make certain Talia lost her scholarship if she complained again. Then Mallory revealed what no one else knew. She had recorded the entire confrontation from another angle. The video began before Preston approached the table. It showed the certificate being passed between his friends. It captured the jokes about Talia's scholarship, her clothing, and the internship. It showed Preston deliberately moving the drink as Talia reached for the paper. Most importantly, it captured his voice clearly when he leaned toward her. People like you should learn when they're being tolerated, the recording continued. Talia tried to leave once. Preston's friend blocked her. She moved in the opposite direction. He blocked her again. Only then did she push through the space they refused to give her. The video ended. For several seconds, no one spoke. Students slowly lowered their phones. Faculty members stared at the floor. Assistant Dean Whitcomb looked toward Dr. Sloan as though waiting for someone else to explain what could no longer be denied. Graham Vale leaned toward his attorney. Preston remained frozen in his seat, watching the protection around him collapse. Talia held the $5 bill tightly in one hand. Mallory's voice trembled when she explained why she had remained silent. She had feared losing her friends, her place in their social circle, and the comfort that came from belonging. Yesterday, hundreds of students watched and did nothing, she said. This morning, 1,000 strangers came because one person refused to look away. For months, administrators, witnesses, and bullies had spoken for Talia. Now, the entire college was waiting for her to speak for herself. Talia rose slowly from her seat. The room had spent hours discussing her complaints, her scholarship, her behavior, and her future. Administrators had reduced her experience to policy language. Preston had treated her pain as entertainment. Witnesses had watched her humiliation through phone screens. Now, for the first time, no one else was speaking for her. She walked to the front of the hall and faced the people who had ignored her, doubted her, or remained silent. Her voice was steady. The bullying hurt, she began. Being told it was not serious enough to matter hurt more. No one interrupted. Talia explained that she had earned her scholarship through years of discipline, sacrifice, and academic work. She had earned the hospital internship through her grades, clinical performance, and faculty recommendations. She should not have been forced to apologize for occupying a space she had qualified to enter. Yet every time she reported the harassment, the college treated her presence as the problem. Every dismissed complaint taught Preston that he was protected. Every closed investigation told him he could go further. Every witness who looked away made the next incident easier. The people who bullied me were watching the administration, Talia said. They were learning what they could do without consequences. She looked toward the administrators. The college had spent more energy protecting reputations, donor relationships, and public appearances than it had spent protecting students. Talia made clear that she did not want revenge. She did not want violence. She did not want Preston threatened, attacked, or destroyed. She wanted him held accountable through the same standards that should apply to every student. She wanted the truth acknowledged without requiring 1,000 motorcycles, public outrage, and national attention. No student should have to reach a crisis before this college decides to believe them, she said. Then Talia paused. I was told to be grateful that this college allowed me through its doors, but I earned my place here. Dignity was never supposed to be an additional privilege. The room remained silent. Behind her, the bikers stood with their helmets held at their sides. They did not shout, applaud, or attempt to speak over her. Their silence made their purpose unmistakable. They had not come to replace Talia's voice. They had come to make certain no one could silence it again. Talia presented her demands. Her disciplinary action must be canceled immediately. Her hospital internship must be restored, and her scholarship protected. She called for an independent investigation into how her complaints had been handled, along with a review of previously dismissed discrimination cases. She demanded protection against retaliation, a complete separation between donor influence and student discipline, and transparent reporting procedures students could trust. She asked for a student-led anti-harassment committee and mandatory bystander intervention training, so future witnesses would understand that watching quietly was also a choice. Then Talia removed the transparent sleeve from her hand. She placed the crumpled $5 bill on the table before Dr. Sloan. A stranger understood my humanity after knowing me for 5 minutes, she said. This college had months. Comment. I stand with Talia if you believe dignity should never depend on race, wealth, or family influence. Talia had entered Crestview, believing survival required silence. She now stood before the entire college, not only defending her own future, but demanding protection for every student who might otherwise be taught that their pain was inconvenient. For several seconds after Talia finished speaking, no one in the hall moved. The silence was no longer uncertainty. It was the weight of evidence that could not be dismissed. Dr. Everett Sloan looked toward the college attorney, then toward the cameras, the former students, the faculty members, and the rows of writers standing behind Talia. The administration had lost control of the story. Every delay now looked like further protection for the people who had caused the harm. Sloan returned to the microphone. He announced that Talia's disciplinary suspension was canceled effective immediately. Her scholarship would remain protected, and her hospital internship would be restored. A murmur moved through the hall, but Talia did not celebrate. She listened carefully. After everything that had happened, she understood that promises mattered only when they were enforced. Sloan continued. Preston Vale would be suspended from campus, pending a formal disciplinary hearing. Assistant Dean Lenora Whitcomb would be placed on administrative leave while an outside investigation examined how Talia's complaints and similar cases had been handled. The college would hire an independent firm to review previously closed discrimination complaints. Students who had reported retaliation would be contacted directly. Until a permanent system could be created, Crestview would establish a temporary reporting channel outside the administration office. Graham Vale would also be removed from his advisory responsibilities during the investigation. For the first time, his money could not stop the consequences from reaching him. Preston stood abruptly. He claimed his comments had been jokes. He said the recording lacked context and accused Mallory of turning against him to protect herself. But the full video showed the planning, the blocked exits, and the words he had spoken. The messages recovered from the group chat showed that the certificate and confrontation had been arranged in advance. There was no misunderstanding left to hide behind. Security officers approached Preston and asked him to leave the hall pending the disciplinary process. He looked toward his father, expecting intervention. Graham Vale remained seated beside his attorney. Preston was escorted out without apologizing. His removal brought relief, but not closure. An investigation would take time. Announced policies could still fail if the college treated them as public relations promises. Talia might continue facing whispers, resentment, and students who blamed her for the attention Crestview had received. Real reform would require continued pressure, transparent results, and people willing to speak after the motorcycles were gone. As the meeting ended, several students who had watched the humiliation approached Talia. Some apologized for laughing. Others admitted they had recorded the incident but never offered the footage. A few said they had wanted to help, but were afraid of becoming targets themselves. Talia listened without comforting them. "An apology matters," she said. "What you do the next time it happens matters more." The students lowered their eyes. Talia's future had not been completely repaired. The college had not suddenly become fair, and the people who failed her had not all accepted responsibility. But her scholarship was safe. Her internship was restored. Her complaints were no longer invisible. For the first time since the bullying began, Talia felt relief without mistaking it for victory. Accountability had started. The work of making it permanent had not. And everyone in that hall understood the college would now be judged not by its announcement, but by what happened afterward. Outside the college, the riders gathered around their motorcycles in long, quiet rows. The confrontation inside the hall was over, but Nadine's final ride had not yet been completed. Black memorial ribbons moved gently from handlebars and mirrors. At the front of the procession, a photograph of Nadine had been secured to Wade's motorcycle. She was smiling in the picture, standing beside a group of children during one of the hospital toy drives she had organized. Talia stood beside Wade as students began leaving the administration building. For the first time that morning, no one was shouting. No one was demanding answers. The riders who had shaken the campus with the sound of 1,000 engines now stood in complete silence. Wade told Talia about the life Nadine had built around helping other people. She had spent years raising money for families overwhelmed by cancer treatment. She had arranged meals for parents who slept beside hospital beds, paid for hotel rooms near specialist clinics, and organized transportation for patients who could not afford to travel. The annual ride had been her way of reminding families that illness should not force them to struggle alone. Now, the $5 Promise Fund would continue that work. It would support students facing discrimination and retaliation. It would provide emergency food assistance to young people choosing between meals and education. It would help students reach family members during medical emergencies and provide legal support when institutions attempted to punish them for speaking out. A portion of the fund would also continue assisting cancer-affected families connected to Nadine's annual ride. Talia looked at the photograph on Wade's motorcycle. Why did she care so much about someone she had never met? She asked. Wade looked toward the college buildings. Because she knew what it felt like to have your future decided by something you never chose. Talia removed the protected $5 bill from her pocket and held it toward him. Wade shook his head. Keep it. Not because you owe us anything. Keep it because one day you may meet someone who thinks nobody is coming. Talia closed her hand around the sleeve. A chapter leader asked everyone to remove their helmets. The riders bowed their heads. Students who had gathered along the pathways slowly did the same. Professors, reporters, police officers, and former students joined them in a moment of silence for Nadine. Talia stood beside Wade beneath the black ribbons, holding the $5 that had connected two strangers at the worst moments of their lives. When the silence ended, the engines did not start together. One motorcycle came to life, then another. The sound moved slowly through the gathering, until the entire road was filled with a steady rumble. The riders had arrived to repay a debt. They left knowing Talia had given them something larger than $5, a reason to turn grief into action. Several months later, Talia was still enrolled at Crestview State. She completed the hospital internship Preston had tried to take from her and received strong evaluations from the nurses who supervised her work. The independent investigation confirmed that multiple student complaints had been mishandled. Several administrators faced disciplinary consequences, and restrictions were placed on donor involvement in student conduct cases. Crestview created an independent reporting office outside the authority of the administrators implicated in the investigation. Former students were invited to reopen complaints that had been closed without proper review. Bystander intervention training became mandatory for students and staff. The changes were not perfect, and they did not erase what had happened. Some students still resented Talia. Some believed the college had been embarrassed unnecessarily. Others treated her as a symbol rather than a person. But the silence had been broken. The Nadine Mercer $5 Promise Fund began helping students with emergency meals, transportation, legal consultations, and educational expenses. It also continued supporting families affected by cancer. Nadine's annual charity ride was renamed the Nadine Mercer $5 Promise Ride. Each year, riders were asked to bring at least $5 and the name of someone who had once helped them when they felt alone. Talia accepted a position as a student representative on Crestview's Accountability Committee. She reviewed policies, listened to student concerns, and repeatedly reminded administrators that procedures meant nothing if frightened students could not trust them. The original $5 bill remained inside its transparent sleeve. Talia kept it in her notebook, beside her nursing notes and internship records. She did not preserve it because it was valuable. She preserved it because of everything it had carried. Talia's $5 did not purchase justice. Justice should never have required payment. But those $5 carried a father to his daughter, gave him 6 final minutes, and carried a dying woman's final request back to a student who believed she was alone. The motorcycles eventually left Crestview State. The question they brought with them remained. When cruelty happens in front of us, will we record it, excuse it, or stand beside the person facing it? Sometimes kindness returns as money. Sometimes it returns as 1,000 voices refusing to remain silent. If Talia's story stayed with you, don't let it end when this video does. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories like hers. Stories about ordinary people who choose kindness when the world gives them every reason to look away. Stories about courage appearing in the most unexpected places. And stories that remind us that one small act can travel farther than anyone could imagine. And share this video with someone who still believes compassion matters. Send it to a friend, a family member, or anyone who needs to remember that standing beside another person can change the direction of a life. Talia gave away her last $5 without knowing what they would become. Wade carried that kindness forward. Nadine turned it into a final promise, and 1,000 riders made certain that promise was heard. Help this story travel one step further. Subscribe, share it, and keep kindness moving. Because the next person who feels completely alone may be waiting for someone like you to remind them that they are not.